Have you ever noticed that the cruelest voice in your head sounds exactly like them? You left the narcissist. You blocked their number, changed your address, maybe even moved cities. But what if they never actually left you? What if their voice is still there, still deciding who you're allowed to be, still whispering that you're too sensitive, too demanding, too much? This isn't about them anymore. It's about what they left behind, inside of you. Meet Jenny. 3 years ago, she walked away from a relationship that nearly destroyed her sense of self. She did everything right: therapy, no contact, rebuilding her life. On paper, she's free. But here's what nobody talks about. Last week, Jenny was in a meeting sharing an idea she'd been developing for months. Halfway through her presentation, a familiar feeling crept in. Her chest tightened. Her voice got smaller, and that old familiar whisper started, "You're talking too much. Nobody wants to hear this. You should just stop." The room was supportive. Her boss was nodding, but Jenny heard his voice. The one that used to cut her off mid-sentence, roll his eyes when she got excited about something, make her feel like every word out of her mouth was an inconvenience. She wrapped up quickly, apologizing for going on too long. Later, driving home, she realized something terrifying. He wasn't even there, but somehow he was still controlling how she showed up in the world. Jenny isn't alone. Millions of people have physically escaped narcissistic relationships only to discover they're still emotionally imprisoned by echoes of their abuser, still negotiating with a ghost that lives inside their own mind. Carl Jung had a name for this phenomenon: the internalized oppressor. It's when the narcissist no longer needs to be present because their judgments, their punishments, their impossible standards now live inside you. You've become their representative in your own inner world. This creates what Jung called a split in the psyche. Two distinct parts emerge, and they're at war with each other. The survival self. This is the version of you that learned to walk on eggshells, to scan every room for emotional landmines, to make yourself smaller so you wouldn't trigger their rage. This part still operates as if you're in danger. It whispers, comply to stay safe, shrink to survive, don't rock the boat. And then there's your real self, the version of you that aches to speak your truth, to take up space, to feel your feelings, without a committee of internal critics weighing in on whether those feelings are justified. This part holds your authentic desires, your creativity, your spontaneous laughter, your right to exist fully and unapologetically. This is the part that knew instinctively when something wasn't right. The part that felt the gaslighting in your bones, even when you couldn't name it yet. Your real self remembers what it felt like to be excited about things without having to dim your enthusiasm for fear of being called too much. It remembers having opinions without immediately second-guessing them, having preferences without feeling guilty for them, having boundaries without feeling like you needed to justify them with a dissertation. It remembers what it felt like to trust your own perceptions, to believe your own experience, to know that your feelings were valid simply because you felt them. It remembers what it was like to love without keeping score, to give without resentment, to be generous without feeling exploited. But this real self has been relegated to what Carl Jung called the shadow, the parts of our personality that we've been forced to hide, deny, or suppress because showing up authentically once felt like a matter of life and death. Here's where it gets psychologically complex. You begin experiencing what I call traumatic loyalty. You start betraying your own truth to stay loyal to someone who systematically taught you that being yourself was a threat to your safety, your security, your right to be loved. You censor your words before you speak them, running every sentence through an internal filter. Will this make me seem needy? Will this be too much? Will this make them uncomfortable? Will this trigger their rage? Will this result in the silent treatment? Will this give them ammunition to use against me later? You apologize for having needs, for taking up time for existing in a way that might inconvenience someone else. Sorry for calling. Sorry for bringing this up. Sorry for having feelings about this. Sorry for existing. You feel guilty for setting boundaries because boundaries once resulted in punishment, the silent treatment, explosive rage, or that particular brand of emotional manipulation that made you feel like you were losing your mind. You learn to read the room obsessively, scanning for any sign that someone might be annoyed with you, disappointed in you, or growing tired of you. You become a master of emotional labor, managing other people's moods, anticipating their needs, smoothing over their social awkwardness, making excuses for their behavior. Jung understood this split intimately. He said, "The Carl Jung shadow doesn't just hide our pain, it holds the parts of us that were never allowed to exist." Think about it. What parts of yourself did you learn to hide your anger when you were treated poorly? Your excitement about things you loved, your right to disagree, your need for emotional intimacy, your desire to be seen and understood rather than managed and controlled. What dreams did you stop talking about because they rolled their eyes? What opinions did you stop sharing because they made you feel stupid for having them? What parts of your personality did you learn to apologize for? The narcissist didn't just hurt you. They colonized your inner space, installing their voice as the narrator of your internal experience. They didn't just criticize you. They taught you to criticize yourself. They didn't just control your behavior. They taught you to control yourself on their behalf. And now, even in their absence, you're still following their rules, still seeking their approval, still afraid of their judgment, still living your life as if they're watching and waiting to pounce on any sign that you're getting too big for your britches. But here's what most people don't realize. This isn't weakness. This isn't evidence that you're broken or codependent or that you lack willpower. This is your psyche trying to protect you using outdated information. Your survival self is still operating from a blueprint of danger that no longer exists, still trying to keep you safe in a war that ended years ago. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between past and present trauma. It just knows. The last time I was fully myself, I got hurt. The last time I took up space, I was punished. The last time I had boundaries, I was abandoned. So I'd better stay small, stay quiet, stay manageable. But what if staying small is now the thing that's hurting you most? Here's the revelation that changes everything. The person narrating your inner world right now might not be you. Whose expectations are you still trying to meet, even in the privacy of your own thoughts? Whose approval are you still seeking, even though they're no longer in your life? Most people think freedom means physical distance, but psychological freedom is something entirely different. It's the ability to think your own thoughts, feel your own feelings, and make decisions based on your own values, not the internalized voice of someone who spent years convincing you that your perspective didn't matter. Let me share the signs that you're still being controlled, even from a distance. First sign: you find yourself censoring your emotions before you even express them. You'll be legitimately upset about something, a friend who consistently flakes on plans, a coworker who takes credit for your ideas, a family member who crosses a clearly stated boundary, but before you can fully feel the anger or disappointment, that voice kicks in. You're overreacting. It's not that big a deal. Other people have it worse. You should be more understanding. You're being too sensitive. You end up comforting everyone else about the thing that hurt you. You find yourself explaining away other people's bad behavior, making excuses for them, taking responsibility for their actions. They didn't mean it. They're going through a hard time. They probably didn't realize. I must have misunderstood. Second sign. You overapologize for things that don't require apologies. Sorry for calling. Sorry for having an opinion. Sorry for taking up space. Sorry for bringing this up. Sorry for having needs. Sorry for existing. You've internalized the message that your existence is somehow an imposition, that your needs are inconvenient, that your feelings are a burden others have to carry. You apologize for things that aren't your fault, for having preferences, for disagreeing, for not being psychic, for being human. You say sorry more than you say your own name. Third sign. You feel guilty every time you set a boundary, even when it's completely reasonable. You say no to working late again and immediately feel like you need to justify it with a novel-length explanation. You ask someone to stop interrupting you and spend the next hour wondering if you were too harsh. You tell a friend you can't loan them money and feel guilty for the rest of the week. Setting a boundary used to result in punishment, silent treatment, rage, guilt trips, or that special kind of emotional manipulation that made you question your own sanity. So now, even healthy boundaries feel dangerous. Even reasonable requests feel like too much to ask. Fourth sign. You confuse peace with silence and mistake numbness for healing. You've learned that avoiding conflict means avoiding pain, so you choose emotional paralysis over authenticity. You keep the peace by keeping quiet, but that's not actually peace. That's the absence of yourself. You say, "I'm fine," when you're not fine. You smile when you want to scream. You agree when you want to disagree. You go along to get along, all while a part of you withers away from lack of expression. Fifth sign. You constantly second-guess your own perceptions, especially about relationships and people's motives. Maybe I'm remembering it wrong. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm the problem. You've been gaslighted so effectively, so systematically, that you no longer trust your own experience of reality. You defer to other people's versions of events, even when they contradict what you clearly witnessed. You doubt your own memories, your own feelings, your own interpretation of situations. Sixth sign. You feel responsible for other people's emotions and reactions. If someone gets upset, your first thought isn't, "I wonder what's going on with them." It's, "What did I do wrong?" You've been trained to believe that you have the power to control other people's feelings, which means their feelings are always somehow your fault. Someone has a bad day, and you assume it's because of something you said. Someone seems distant, and you immediately start reviewing your recent interactions to figure out what you did to upset them. Someone is in a bad mood, and you feel responsible for fixing it. Seventh sign. You perform emotional labor that nobody asked for. You manage other people's moods, anticipate their needs, smooth over their social awkwardness, make excuses for their behavior. You've become an emotional janitor, cleaning up messes. You didn't make managing problems that aren't yours to solve. You find yourself constantly accommodating, constantly adjusting, constantly performing the version of yourself that you think will keep others comfortable. You're so busy managing everyone else's experience that you lose track of your own. Here's Carl Jung's most piercing insight. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And one of the hardest truths to face is realizing that the narcissist doesn't need to be in the room to control you anymore, because you've become their representative inside yourself. You're enforcing their rules more strictly than they ever could. You're policing your own thoughts, punishing yourself for crimes you didn't commit, and limiting yourself in ways they could only dream of. You've become so good at anticipating their criticism that you criticize yourself before anyone else gets the chance. You've internalized their voice so completely that it feels like your own thoughts, your own standards, your own moral compass. Think about it. How often do you hear yourself saying things they used to say? How often do you find yourself judging others the way they judged you? How often do you catch yourself using their exact phrases, their particular brand of criticism, their specific way of dismissing feelings or minimizing pain? You've not only survived them, you've become them, at least in the privacy of your own mind. And that might be the most insidious form of control of all the kind that continues long after they've left the building. But recognizing this isn't defeat. It's the beginning of reclaiming your psychological sovereignty. It's the first step toward asking the most revolutionary question of all. What would you do? Say, dream, create, or become if that critical voice disappeared tomorrow? What would you try if you weren't afraid of being too much? What would you say if you trusted that your words mattered? What would you create if you weren't worried about being judged? What would you dream if you believed those dreams were valid? That's not fantasy. That's who you actually are underneath the conditioning, underneath the fear, underneath the years of learning to be afraid of yourself. That's your real self waiting patiently in the Carl Jung shadow for you to remember that you were never the problem. You were just a whole person trying to survive in a situation that required you to break yourself into manageable pieces. The turning point isn't dramatic. It doesn't happen in a blaze of insight or a moment of righteous anger. It's quiet, almost imperceptible. It begins the first time you hear that critical voice, and instead of automatically believing it, you pause. You ask, wait, is this actually my thought, or is this something I learned? Meet David. 6 months into his healing journey, he was at his nephew's birthday party. His sister asked him to give a toast. Immediately, the familiar panic set in. You'll say something wrong. Everyone will think you're attention-seeking. Keep it short. But this time, David caught himself. He recognized that voice. It belonged to his ex-partner who used to mock his speeches, roll her eyes when he got emotional, make him feel ridiculous for caring about moments like these. Instead of shrinking, David took a breath. He thought, what would I say if I trusted that my words mattered? His toast was heartfelt. He got a little choked up talking about watching his nephew grow. A few people wiped their eyes, and afterward his sister hugged him and said, "That was beautiful. Thank you." That night, David realized something profound. The voice that told him he was too much had been wrong. He wasn't too much. He was exactly enough. This is what Carl Jung called shadow integration. It's not about hating the critical voice or trying to silence it through force. It's about recognizing it for what it is, a relic of survival. A strategy you develop to navigate an impossible situation. But you're no longer in that situation. The danger has passed, and what once protected you might now be limiting you. Shadow integration means making friends with the parts of yourself you've been taught to hide. Your anger, it might contain important information about your boundaries. your sensitivity. It might be a superpower, not a weakness. Your need for emotional connection. It's not too much, it's human. You begin to understand that you weren't the problem in that relationship. You were the solution they couldn't handle. You stop chasing external validation because you're learning to validate yourself. You stop performing emotional perfection because you're discovering that your messy, complicated humanity is actually beautiful. The power shift happens internally first. Instead of asking, "How can I avoid their criticism?" you start asking, "What do I actually think about this?" Instead of, "How can I keep the peace?" You ask, "What would honoring myself look like here?" This isn't selfishness. This is self-respect. And it's the foundation of every healthy relationship you'll ever have. Now comes the return back to the version of yourself that existed before their voice took over. Back to the person who had opinions, who felt deeply, who took up space without apology. This return isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before you learned to be afraid of yourself. Here are the practices that create lasting change. First, learn to name the voice. When you hear internal criticism, pause and ask, "Who is talking right now?" Write it down. Trace it back. You'll be amazed how often those harsh judgments aren't yours. They're echoes of someone who needed to diminish you to feel powerful. Second, consciously replace the narration. Instead of, "I'm too emotional," try, "I feel deeply, and that's a gift." Instead of, "I should be grateful and stop complaining," try, "I can be grateful and still honor my boundaries." Instead of, "Nobody wants to hear what I have to say," try, "My voice matters and the right people want to hear it." Third, move with self-compassion. When you catch yourself operating from fear, don't add shame to the mix. That's just more internalized abuse. Instead, place a hand on your heart and say, "Of course you're scared. Of course you're protecting yourself. We've been through a lot, but we're safe now." Fourth practice. What Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, separate from others' expectations. This means making decisions based on your values, not their potential reactions. It means saying no without a paragraph of justification. It means letting people be disappointed in you without making their emotions your emergency. You start to notice something beautiful happening. The more you trust yourself, the less you need others to validate your reality. The more you honor your own feelings, the less you need others to manage them for you. You're not broken. You never were. You were just a whole person trying to survive in a situation that required you to fragment yourself to fit. Those fragments are coming back together now. And what emerges isn't perfect, it's authentic. It's not always easy to be around, it's real. It's not what everyone wants. It's what you actually are. And that Jung would say is the point of being human, not to be what others need us to be, but to become who we actually are. You left the narcissist. Now it's time to leave behind who you became under their control. Because the real you, the one who speaks up in meetings, who sets boundaries without guilt, who loves fiercely and feels deeply, was never too much. You were just told that by someone who was threatened by your light. Jung said it perfectly. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That person you were before you learned to be afraid, they're still there. Under the criticism, under the self-doubt, under the exhaustion of performing someone else's version of acceptable. They're waiting for you to remember that your thoughts matter, your feelings are valid, and your presence is not a problem to be solved. If this resonates with something deep inside, You don't run from it. Stay with it. Let it work on you. Watch this again if you need to. Write about what comes up. Breathe through the discomfort of recognition. And if you're ready to name what voice you've been living with, what belief you're ready to release, share it in the comments below. Start with, the belief I'm letting go of is, because when we name what's been controlling us, we begin to break its power. Your real voice is waiting. We'll see you there.